Hello there, everyone. I'm Gaylen Morse, and welcome to Journey to Recovery. We appreciate you listening. Our podcast today is Making Necessary Changes in a Codependent Relationship. Chemical dependency problems often cause relationship difficulties. In today's program, we'll discuss rescuing behaviors common in codependency and look at ways to limit enabling those we care about. Our host is Dr. Hal Baumchen, a licensed clinical psychologist and licensed alcohol and drug counselor. He's an author, speaker, and clinician with over 30 years of counseling experience. I'm here today with Tim Bode, Operations Director at Northland Counseling Services, and with Dr. Hal Baumchen, our host at Journey to Recovery. Morning, guys.
Morning, Gaylen.
Hey, Gaylen. Morning, Tim. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for asking.
How was that play you were working on?
It turned out really well.
Okay, tell us again what you do there.
I am the director of summer theater shows for a group called Mayor Cast, Community Arts Summer Theater, and we did The Music Man this summer.
Oh, wow. And what was your role in that? You were a director and then...
I also had a small part in one of the scenes. I was salesman number 5.
All right.
So we had about 50 people in the cast, plus...
big group, wow.
Yeah, some younger kids that we added in at the end. So about 62 people on stage at one point.
Wow.
So did salesman number 5 get to sing?
I don't actually sing, no.
We do
We do kind of a talky song at the beginning. So, Yep, it was a very good show. Thanks for asking.
62 cast members is like 62 cats in a cardboard box trying to keep them all rounded up and get them to do what they need to do.
Yes, it can be like that sometimes, exactly. Especially when you stop talking for 2 or 3 seconds and then they all immediately start having their own conversations.
Sure. We're going to try to talk through relationship difficulties that occur when somebody has an addiction. And oftentimes, there can be somebody who has the addiction. They're related, of course, with other family members and friends. Those friends and family members sometimes take on a rescuing or codependent relationship. We're going to try to talk through what that looks like and what can be done if that occurs. I was kind of looking for some segue from 62 cast members into codependency, but I found none. So we'll just make the best of it.
Well, maybe you can explain for us what consequences mean for our listeners.
Well, again, codependent relationships often have a disturbed and dysfunctional understanding of consequences in a relationship. So what happens, Gaylen, when I push the doorbell? When I push the doorbell, what do you think happens?
My dog starts barking.
Exactly. Yes. The secondary doorbell goes off. What happens if I leave the stove on high?
Something boils over.
Yeah, something boils over. So there's a consequence that follows that particular action. And we learn this while we're very young. And the simple truth follows all of our lives. If I do this behavior, there's probably going to be a consequence to that.
And sometimes those consequences are rather unpleasant.
Absolutely. So I grew up on a farm, so I'm kind of a master at how this works. If you plant corn, you can reasonably expect to reap corn. And if you plant weeds, you can reasonably expect to reap weeds. Here's the exception. The kid plants weeds, and right before he gets that great big harvest of weeds, Mom interrupts the principle of sowing and reaping and rescues him and drags over a truckload of corn, which actually ends up enabling him to continue the dysfunctional behaviors. And that thing happens in codependent relationships where somebody should be reaping consequences, but someone else is rescuing them from it.
And consequences to those things, to our actions, are really often predictable, whether we like it or not.
Yeah, but here they come, and I kind of wish I wouldn't have done the behavior, but in our effort to help a loved one, we often cringe when their actions bring those unpleasant consequences like you're talking about, and we wish we could interrupt the inevitable.
Yeah, and then when we can't prevent the action of a loved one, we may try to eliminate, delay, or minimize those consequences for them if we can.
Right, so they drive too fast, but mom or dad pays the ticket, or something like that. So they didn't really learn from their behavior because they didn't experience the consequence.
Right.
Can you actually explain codependent behavior?
Codependency is a type of dysfunctional helping relationship where one person supports or enables another person's addiction or their mental health problems or their poor choices or their immaturity, maybe enables them to continue in their lack of judgment or irresponsible behavior, or maybe chronic underachievement, but somebody's always covering for that or making excuses for that or enabling that to continue.
How do some people then end up becoming codependent?
Man, I've wondered about that, Gaylen. I don't really have like the magic, it's always just like this, but I think people in a codependent relationship are often defined by what another person thinks of them. And so I need you so much to love me or be with me that I will cover for you so that you don't go away. And then if you're happy with me, then I'm happy. If you're upset with me, then I'm all frustrated. So the codependent person gets pretty tied into somebody else's thoughts of them.
Yeah, so there's usually an excessive emotional or psychological reliance on a partner.
Yeah, absolutely. So, well, shouldn't you care that somebody likes you? Yeah, but in a codependent relationship, I think maybe it gets too tightly enmeshed. And one partner typically requires extra support or extra covering or lying because of the addiction. And one person supports another, and the other one becomes increasingly more irresponsible, and the other person becomes increasingly more responsible. And that again, is common where you have immaturity or poor health or irresponsibility or that underachievement thing.
So the codependent person often sacrifices what they want or need in order to retain that approval.
Yep, they lack assertiveness or look weak or don't say anything, and they become more passive, more dependent, and they actually have difficulty identifying their own feelings and their own needs because they're so tied into what the addict wants. I've heard this. I like this funny phrase. You know you're codependent, or you might be codependent if you're drowning and someone else's life flashes before your eyes. So, hey, I can't drown here. I didn't leave a sandwich in the refrigerator for him. Again, what he needs, what he wants, what's important to him is even more important than what I want. So I'll sacrifice what I need in order to make sure they have what they want.
Wow.
We're going to go through some signs of codependency and talk about those a little bit.
Number one, undervaluing self and overvaluing others.
Yep, undervaluing self. So again, what I need is not important. What you need, wow, that's really going to be primary.
How about feeling trapped or powerless in a relationship?
All your well-meaning friends are like, you know, he's killing you. Get out of that relationship. It's so bad for you. And maybe she feels stuck, trapped, bound. I need his income. He's not always like this. So, yeah, they kind of feel trapped and stuck.
Constantly seeking approval.
Well, yeah, and I like approval. But, again, you sacrifice your own needs in order to try to keep that person from being mad at you or that sort of thing. Like, I need you to want me, need me, approve of me, affirm me, encourage me. We were laughing earlier, Tim, because Gaylen's printer needed some attention.
Yeah,
and so
right.
Gaylen wasn't giving it attention. He was giving it approval and nurturance and encouragement.
But what it needed was paper. How about covering up someone's dysfunctional behavior to protect the relationship?
Right. So you're going to be mad at me if I don't lie for you, so I lied to make sure that the relationship would continue.
Another sign of codependency is having difficulty or the inability to say no or to set limits.
Yeah. Do you ever have trouble saying no? Comes out like this. Yes. 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 Oh, what's the matter with me? Can't ever say no. Can't set a limit. Can't draw a boundary. Yeah, it's very common in a codependent relationship. And another place that that I see is the person who's in that codependent relationship really has low self-esteem. Again, not protecting herself or himself, and is constantly worried, like you mentioned earlier, what other people think. That lack of approval.
How about being unsure of your own goals and desires and your own needs and things like that?
Yeah, and again, the codependent person might be looking at the world through the other person's needs and desires rather than their own. Hey, what do you like to do when you go on vacation? Well, my husband really likes to fish. Okay, what do you like to do? Well, he often goes fishing pretty early in the morning. Okay, what do you like to do? And they really have trouble kind of getting at what they need, what they want, what they enjoy, because what the other person needs is more important.
Another sign is seeing yourself as weak or passive.
Right, I can't do anything about that. Well, just stand up to him. Oh, I'm not sure I can.
Another sign is being easily manipulated by guilt.
Right, guilt's a big one. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more, but one of those things that, hey, you never do anything for me, or just do this one thing, or after all I've given to you, you can't do this for me. And that's guilt, and it's very manipulative.
How about feeling that you haven't done enough?
Right. One of those things that gets used to elicit guilt. You haven't done enough. You don't ever do anything for me. You've always helped my brother. You don't help me.
Continuing to put others ahead of ourselves.
Yeah, again, self-sacrificing to a fault. Hey, it's nice to serve other people. Don't get me wrong. But when you continually do that and you can't take care of yourself, that can be a real problem. Do you remember when you're on an airplane and the flight attendants say, if we lose cabin pressure, a mask will fall from a compartment in the ceiling above you? Please place the mask on yourself before helping the elderly or small children. And it's really a nice principle in life. It's important to help the elderly and small children, but get yourself stable and secure and safe first.
Another one is having difficulty expressing your own needs or being reluctant to share your feelings openly.
So again, if I told you the truth, maybe you would leave me, maybe you'd be mad at me. So I don't express it. Why don't you just stand up to that person? Well, he doesn't listen.
How about having difficulty trusting others or having self-doubts?
Yep, very common. We're sounding like we're overlapping here a little bit, but it has a lot to do with not trusting, not feeling sure in a relationship. Sure.
Having trouble making decisions.
Yep. I would like to do something different, but I'm scared. And what if I do it wrong? What if you disapprove of me?
Yeah, and being reluctant to express your opinion.
Same thing.
Yeah, right.
And then maybe lastly, making efforts to avoid conflict or disapproval, where, again, it's just going to turn into a battle, so I'm not going to bring it up. I'm not going to say anything. And that's a hallmark of a dysfunctional and codependent relationship. Why don't you just draw boundaries, stand up to that person? Well, I don't like the conflict. It's just going to cause a fight.
So, Dr. Hall, I'm sure you've seen examples of codependent relationships in your work. Can you give us an example of someone who's codependent and enabling? Like, how does that look? How do they act?
Yeah, I've got a story that occurred almost 20 years ago now. A husband and wife came into my office, and they were in their 60s, and they were having trouble with their son, and they wanted to talk to somebody about it. So they set up an appointment with me in the counseling center. And I found it kind of odd the way the conversation began. And the way I remember this or recall this, they came in and asked if they should buy cigarettes for their adult son. I asked how old he was, and that they replied that he was about 28 years old. And it just struck me as odd right off the bat.
Like you said, there must be a story here.
Yeah, like why would you want to buy cigarettes? Why do you have to come to a counselor to ask that? What's going on here? So they told me that their son had finished high school, although he had been in some trouble already for smoking pot while he was in high school, and he did a lot of drinking. And within a short while, after finishing high school, he got addicted to cocaine, and then he was snorting cocaine regularly and going on frequent cocaine binges.
And did his parents know that?
He lied to his parents about what he was doing and how much trouble he was in and, missing certain things. He'd lie about that. And they kept believing him for quite some time. By the time he was 20 or 21 years old, his parents tried to get him some help, but he didn't want their help and he didn't want anybody's help. He wanted their money, and he came up with clever ways to try to get it. He didn't want to quit using drugs. He kept trying to figure out how to get somebody to pay for his drugs. He didn't like working. And as it pertained to his parents, he really became kind of masterful at manipulating them or deceiving them.
And I suppose his parents then would cover for him or bail him out of trouble.
That's where this whole thing kind of ended up going, Gaylen. They got into a pattern of paying for things that he would need, and then he'd get in more trouble. They'd help him buy a car, but then he wouldn't be able to make the payments on it, so they'd want him to keep the car, and they wanted him to go to work, so, they got to make sure that he pays for the car, and because they want him to drive the car to work. He wasn't very interested in working anyway. When he did work, he didn't make much of an effort, and he'd often lose the job. And then he just wanted to continue using drugs, and he still needed money for drugs. So he did some house burglaries, got in some trouble, stole some things. He broke into their home one day when his folks were gone, and he stole a credit card. And they couldn't find anything in the house except this one credit card. But it wasn't like a Visa card. It was a credit card from a gas station. If you remember back in the old days, some gas stations would just have a credit card you could use only at their store. You couldn't use it anywhere else. Right. And so what do you do with a gas station credit card? Well, so he went to the gas station and he bought 4 tires that he didn't need, and then he sold those on a secondary market like a pawn shop or something, brand new tires. He sold them for 1/10 of their value, but stuck his parents with the bill, of course, just to get a few bucks together so he could buy drugs. Eventually, all his drug use and his burglaries, fraudulent check charges, and other probation violations all ended up causing him to go to jail repeatedly. And then eventually, he blew off his probation officer so many times that he ended up going to prison. Even though his parents tried to do everything they could to help and protect him from the inevitable consequences.
That must have been really frustrating for his parents.
Yeah, the more they tried, the worse it got, and they were sad more than they were angry with him. He was in St. Cloud prison, and he felt like he didn't have enough money, and he wanted his parents to make deposits in his account at the prison so he could buy cigarettes. And they struggled with how to say no to this guy, how to set some limits and stick to a boundary. And they actually came in to a counselor, for help. They came into me for help. When they told him no, that they weren't going to give him any money, he made them feel like dirt. He'd scream at him and yell and tell them that they didn't love him or care about his, predicament. And he reminded them of how they had disappointed him in the past. Boy, talk about a flip there. Huh? He made them feel guilty for not doing more for him. And although it was difficult for them to say no, they actually, with the little coaching here, became more assertive and began to draw some boundaries.
This case has some common elements in it.
Yeah. Can you see any of them emerging?
Rescuing.
Yeah, and they wanted to rescue him so that he would have the best opportunity to kind of change up his life. So they would rescue him, but he wouldn't take that opportunity. Yeah. Just get in more trouble.
Yeah. Another one is feeling helpless.
They were feeling helpless. They didn't know what to do, and they'd try a little bit, but it wouldn't really work.
And then wanting to help.
Yep. And then they were frustrated, of course, and upset that their little bit of help didn't do anything, didn't work.
Feeling manipulated.
Yeah, they definitely felt manipulated. I think that's probably why they ended up coming for help in the first place. They felt guilty, but they knew that he was using guilt to try to get them, once again, to do what he wanted.
And then the lying and covering up that he did.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Some other examples of codependent and rescuing behavior would be things like a teenage boy wakes up late and his mother takes him to school, Or a wife gets drunk and her husband calls into work and explains that she is sick.
Yeah, so again, you're making excuses for somebody so that they don't get into more trouble. It seems helpful at first, maybe, to reduce the pain, but it ends up just enabling somebody to continue that dysfunctional behavior. If we rescue others, we're just going to end up having to do it again.
So how do we get our friends or loved ones to change when we see this kind of behavior?
Man, don't you think that's just at the crux of the matter, Tim? Like, here's what you need to do, dude. You need to draw a better boundary. No, I don't want to draw a boundary. I want to keep them from being in so much trouble. How can I help my friend? And sometimes, like, man, it's tough to fix that problem.
So he keeps doing self-destructive things, so I keep trying to help.
Right. Bailing someone out of their own personally produced difficulties just ends up kind of perpetuating that rescuing codependent pattern. To change that pattern, you have to change your part of the pattern. The more you love and care for someone, the harder it is to let those consequences fall on someone without reducing the consequences. How do you let them suffer the consequences of their own poor choosing?
Yeah, so let's talk just for a short time about drawing boundaries.
Yeah, don't let yourself compromise your boundaries. Wouldn't that be important? Like,
Yeah.
Stick to it.
This is easy when people think your boundaries make sense, but what do you do if they push back?
Your boundaries never make sense to them. Give me money. No. Well, they didn't like that answer, so they're going to push on it pretty hard.
Yeah.
Your child or your spouse or family member is likely not going to be happy with your actions that affect him or her, so they're going to push on you pretty hard.
So it looks like we're out of time for today. So thanks everybody for listening. Next time we'll look at 10 strategies to draw boundaries. We'll continue that conversation and set limits.
Thanks for listening to today's podcast entitled Making Necessary Changes in a Codependent Relationship. You can download other materials that'll help you develop skills to identify emotional problems, reduce symptoms, and prevent relapse at journeytorecovery.com. We've been visiting with Dr. Hal Baumchen. His expertise and clinical wisdom is now available at journeytorecovery.com. I'm Gaylen Morse. Thanks for listening to today's program. See you next time on Journey to Recovery. Remember, recovery is a journey. Enjoy the ride.